Today's Leadership Series webinar on Choose to Challenge, the International Women's Day theme. I'm Monique Fenech, Head of Sales and Marketing for Australasian Supply Chain Institute. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Darug people as the traditional owners of the land on which ASCI's national office resides here in Parramatta since 1964. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all other Aboriginal people present. Since 2017, ASCI has celebrated International Women's Day around the country, focusing on topics such as mentorship, unconscious bias, and leading cultural change. This year, the theme Choose to Challenge bides well with our annual theme of supply chain vision in the decade for action, reflecting the United Nations Global Sustainability Goals for the decade. In supply chain management, we're in a privileged position to be agents of change for the better. The panelists for today have a deep understanding of their privileged position and don't take it for granted. At ASCI, 1/3 of our members are female, against an industry average of 17%, according to the Department of Education, Skills and Employment. And we've worked hard over the last several years to represent our diverse membership on our boards, in our committees, in our staff, and via our platforms, such as our conference programs, our podcast episodes, our blogs, our webinars, and our keynotes. There's more work to be done. And with your support, ASCI can achieve more. Let's welcome our panelists for today. Linda Venables has over 30 years experience building and leading teams in the UK and in Europe, with the last 14 years in Australia, including her role as Chief Logistics Officer at Metcash. Welcome to the panel, Linda.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. Alexandra Riha has 25 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry across Europe, Asia and Australia. Alexandra is the Head of Operations APAC for Merck Healthcare and President and Chairperson of the Board of ASCI. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
It's great to have you here. Rebecca Presgrave heads up the ANZ procurement function for PZ Cussons. She has established her career working for prominent national and international brands within the FMCG sector, and achievements for her are in sustainable growth, improving operational effectiveness, ethical sourcing and corporate social responsibility. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks, Monique.
It's great to have you. And Esther Mcvicker is Executive Manager, Organisational Systems and Quality Branch at the Royal Australian Mint. She has a 15-year track record in leadership roles, devising and executing best practice strategies to optimise performance and enable sustainable business growth. It's wonderful to have you on the panel. Thank you, Esther.
Good morning, Monique.
And it's interesting that there's a great representation across the nation we have here. Linda is based in Brisbane, Rebecca in Melbourne, Esther in ACT and Alex in Sydney. So that's a great testament to our membership across many regions there. This theme, Choose to Challenge, it's a great one because you can choose to challenge others or you can choose to challenge yourself. Let's start with you, Linda. Linda, you've previously held roles on the Australian Food and Grocery Council's Trading Partner Forum and on the board of GS1 Australia, along with having played a key role in heavy vehicle transport regulation, chairing the Australian Logistics Council's Retail Logistics Safety Committee from 2015 to 2018. If one can't see how much you've challenged yourself over this time, yeah, that's clear, definitely. So from experience working closely with you, Linda, with your time at ASCI, you've been on the New South Wales chapter and on the ASCI Risk Committee and more recently on the board. You were awarded the Supply Chain Leader Award in the last year's conference, and that's an award held by past industry icons such as Roger Corbett, John Katorna and Lindsay Fox. And given all the leaps and bounds that you've made in your career, what advice can you give to other women about making career choices in supply chain management?
Good morning, WA. Good afternoon, everybody else. Monique, thank you for that sensational introduction. I'm blushing. And I don't know that I can offer much in the way of advice, but I thought I would talk through a few of the turning points in my career. And I looked at the definition of the difference between a job and a career. And I think for me, I can only see a career with hindsight. I'm not sure I actually could see a career with foresight. So the initial career choices, I think I remember as long ago as a very young child, people saying to me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm a Generation X. You either were going to be a fireman or a teacher or a nurse. And I couldn't picture what I wanted to be. And I found it really confronting trying to answer the question as a youngster. I think it's inevitable you're highly influenced by your family and the demographic that you grow up in. And so my views of what to do after school formed really from my parents. My mum came to England as a migrant at the age of 15. She didn't speak English, and she took a craft and became a hairdresser. And my dad went to the war, Second World War, came back, and then as an age student in his 20s, put himself through his then A-levels and a degree. And so I think I always understood the importance of education as a youngster, and I wanted to be like my dad. So I inevitably followed the path of going to university. And then I suppose my first choice was what to do. And supply chain didn't exist back then, so the breadth of subjects you could take wasn't as it is today. And so I actually chose something that I liked. And I feel very blessed with hindsight that I went through that educational patch, doing something I was passionate about, which was finding out how things are made. So my first really good experience in education was finding out how things are made. And I then went into a career in the foundry industry, which was a bit of a dead end, because at one point in my first year in the foundry industry, somebody mentioned there were only 50 years of copper left in the world. And I looked around the room and realized lots of things weren't made of metal, they were made of plastic and composite. And so as a career choice early up, it was a bit of a dead end. And from there, I realized I wanted to see how things were made, but all the way from end to end. And I actually joined a manufacturing company. So I went again for what interested me. But this time it was a larger company, and I learned a massive amount about how to be in business and how to be in a business that had goods and customers to service. And so my learning expanded, but I still felt I didn't know enough. And so I was offered a chance to go and have some more education. And I went back to university. I went to Cranfield at the age of 24 and actually did another qualification and learnt about manufacturing management. And from there, my passion for end-to-end increased, but supply chain didn't really exist back then. So I stayed in manufacturing for a number of years. And when I look back over my early years, there were jobs I chose for a particular reason. I chose to join an international company thinking that I might get some international travel. I chose to join a blue chip company because I wanted a blue chip on my resume and thought there would be a big career path. And I think when I look back at career challenges, one of the biggest challenges is in a job when to stay and when to go. And sometimes the reasons to go are based on things like the values of the people around you or the overall viability of a company. And sometimes the choices are in relation to what you need from a lifestyle perspective at the time. And I remember one of the toughest parts of my career was when I was commuting internationally. Be careful what you wish for. And I was on a 7 o'clock flight on a Monday morning out of Heathrow, coming back at 10 o'clock at night on a Thursday, working in another country in another language with a client that didn't want the software solution that I was implementing into their business. And I think back at the breadth of experience I got, but also the personal cost of that commute and the lifestyle that it gave me. I tiptoed into supply chain by accident. I was implementing systems, and as a consultant found that I didn't enjoy implementing systems into other people's companies because so much was out of your control and so much of the success of the project depended on the client. So I hopped over the fence and started to implement systems into the company that I worked for, and that turned out to be a logistics company. And I was in my 30s by the time I found supply chain, and I've loved it because of its breadth, because of its complexity. And I was also reflecting on what career choices I'd made whilst working in supply chain. And I think one of them was to be exposed to as much of the supply chain as I could be, to try and understand the supply chain and its supporting systems and metrics. And whilst supply chain can appear to be quite a technical discipline, for me, it was all about process connections and communication, and how often supply chain challenges are addressed by simply talking to your partner upstream and downstream in the supply chain and finding out what they want. So whilst I think a number of women may have been put off supply chain by thinking it's quite industrial or quite technical, for me, supply chain has been all about partnership all the way across the end to end, as we call it. So I guess back to your point, Monique, about what do we challenge? The biggest challenge for me was when to stay and when to go. And I have to say, some of my changes have not been of my making. So I've been made redundant twice. I've been fired once from a role where I didn't fit with the managing director, and he had the courage to just say to me, "You don't fit with me." And then I've been tapped on the shoulder by people that I've worked with in the past and asked to come into a role that I hadn't even applied for. So again, I would say the challenge in your career is to make sure that you maintain a really broad network of contacts. And then when you are faced with those challenges of when to go and when to stay, you've got inputs from other people, a network of people that you can rely on. And sometimes the missing piece for me was there was no path. Whereas I think with ASCI, we have such a great opportunity to network with people who've been in a role like ours before and take insight from other people about potential next steps.
That is such a wonderful introduction to our topic, Linda. Thank you so much. I got a lot out of that, and I hope everybody else did as well. There's so many parts of your introduction to touch on, which I'm sure all of the other panelists will do so and come back to you as we go throughout the discussion. Alex, I'd like to address, because the last part of Linda's discussion was around the pathways and what Australasian Supply Chain Institute actually has to offer. Well, first of all, congratulations to Linda, Alex and Rebecca, because recently you've all been registered under ASCI's professional accreditation scheme. Linda as a registered practitioner in logistics, Rebecca as a registered practitioner in procurement, and yourself, Alex, as a registered practitioner in operations. Of course, this means you've all been recognised for your work experience, professional certification and tertiary education in that area of the stream that you're registered. And it's a rigorous process that you've been through, but you've also encouraged other women to take that step too. So Alex, over time, do you think that ASCI's scheme will help to encourage people into a career pathway through supply chain management for those wanting to get into the career?
Yeah, thanks, Monique. Yes, absolutely. And for me, the decision why I did this assessment was I wanted to challenge myself. We are here about choose to challenge, and I wanted to challenge myself, especially over the last months, years with the pandemic outbreak. We have seen everybody was speaking about supply chain management and supply chain manager, but we all know there is no standard for it. You can call yourself a supply chain manager. And therefore, I felt it's even more important to go through this assessment. And there is really a framework, really great framework, because it was me deciding. I wanted to show that I want to follow the stringent standards ASCI has established together or based on the professional standards of Australia authority in Australia. And it has a framework where I'm obliged to adhere to continued education, to keep myself on the register, where I commit to go on ethical practices myself. We know we are all in across the supply chain ecosystem. We always ask, we have the different compliances going on. You remember the Slavery Act, the Code of Conduct, and so on. Myself, I feel, as this is within the framework of this accreditation scheme ASCI is offering, I can adhere. I show myself how I want to be made accountable. And I want to follow standards. And we need to find our standards, because this profession, unfortunately, is not somewhere defined. It's not, but let's make it together. Let's define it together based on our experiences, based on our educational, our career paths. And luckily we have different levels on that. And here I would like to invite everyone to come and join us, to keep up the standards, to evolve the standards about supply chain management. But specifically also, I'm inviting women to join us, because it's really a self-reflection, and it's really helping to keep our profession grow and having the quality in the markets. So that's where I'm coming from. And I think it's a wonderful thing.
Alex, the different streams that that people can take in supply chain management, can you talk to that? And also, where does it start? Does it start at the practitioner level?
No, yeah, I missed that. Thanks, man. It's about your start as an associate level, registered associate level. And then it goes further. So we have these 4 different streams: operations, logistics, operations, logistics, procurement, and services. So, and after that, it's the first associate level. Then we have the registered practitioner, and then the registered supply chain management. And the great thing is there is a pathway. There are plenty of degrees out in the field in the universities, but here we really combine the certifications, but also the work experience we have.
Yeah.
Especially in this practitioner area, I think it's a really good pathway to start with the associate level, where you don't have yet perhaps enough experience, but you show dedication, and it's a pathway. And you get the benefit of being put on a public register, where people see that you commit to this ethical behavior. And to stay on this register, you have to show and prove that you participate in continued education. You have to keep up these points, and it's for your own benefit. And that's where I think it's really a good thing. And I'm inviting not only women, but also men. But it's a fantastic thing. And the more we grow and the more we adhere, and the bigger the commitment of the supply chain community is to these standards, the more prosperous our profession will get.
Yeah. Yeah. And Rebecca, what was your feelings after you challenged yourself and became registered? Procurement, there's so much happening in procurement now. What does it mean to be on a public register that says you adhere to ethical practice?
Monique, it really was wonderful to feel recognised for my career. It's always been a rewarding career, but to be able to have a certification of through ASCI, it really demonstrated to me that what I do adds value, and that my ethical sourcing practices are, you know, that they are at the level that they need to be, and I'm very proud of that, and I'm very proud to be part of the certification that ASCI have allowed me to achieve.
Yeah, yeah. I'll get back to you in a second, Esther, because I want to ask you all about continued professional development. But before I do, Linda touched on a professional network being really important for the choices that she made in her career. Rebecca, you're a member of both the Victorian Ethics Committee, the ASCI Ethics Committee, and also the Victorian chapter for NAWO. So you've got lots of professional networks. How important is that, and how important is it early on in your career as opposed to later on in your career?
Well, Monique, it's a great question, and I resonated a lot with some of the things that Linda said. I guess I would start by saying that why it's important is to develop that networking group for yourself, to have a support network for questioning, for challenging, and for your own self-improvement. It's good to be able to look at other experts in your industry or in your field with similar interests to you, to bounce ideas off, and it can really create a lot of confidence in your view, if you're sharing it with like-minded people and they have a similar view, or if they want to challenge it at the same time. I guess further to Linda's point, I didn't have a large network of procurement professionals early on in my career. So through coaching and mentoring and understanding the parts of my role that I was really passionate in, I then sort of directed myself towards those opportunities to explore networks that targeted those passions, in particular the Ethics Committee at ASCI and the NAWO Victorian chapter. So just to touch on NAWO, which is the National Association of Women in Operations, it's a peak body championing women in operations, and their vision is really where men and women can be equally represented and valued at every level. So whilst we're talking about International Women's Day, this is about men as well, and being able to be valued at every level. So through my time on the committee at NAWO and my memberships, through there, I've been able to do personal development programs, internship programs, digital events, mentoring programs. There's so many opportunities there that if anyone's interested in, I can easily connect you in with the right people for memberships to NAWO.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Rebecca. And it's a great partnership that we have with NAWO, and we always value the expertise that comes through from NAWO as well. Your people being on our judging panel for the Diversity and Inclusion Award, which is coming up in July at our conference. So the submissions for that are due at the end of April. Esther, a question for you. We've been talking about commitment to continued learning, and you are the epitome of continued learning. I really value your input here. You completed a master's during COVID. Who does that? You do. And we'd love to find out some tips and hints, as well as hear your story of what does it take for us to be committed to continued learning, and anything that you have to share.
Thanks, Monique. It's really interesting. When you asked me to speak here, I was, of course, a little nervous, but one of the things that really stood out once I heard about the Choose to Challenge theme for this year's International Women's Day, it was almost immediate. And I remember my mum saying to me when I was just a little girl, never let somebody else decide what's best for you. And this was kind of right before she was about to give a primary school teacher a piece of her mind for telling me to be more ladylike in the mid-70s. So my mum was pretty fierce. But to answer your question, I guess the reason I was able to complete a master's during COVID was because my mum set me up for success. So there was never words that you're a woman and you can't, or you can only do these kinds of jobs. There was never the thought that you can't do these things. And I guess one of the biggest lessons I learned from my mum is that learning is a lifelong pursuit. Like, you don't just do it when you're young, you do it throughout your life. So both my parents actually were ones to pick up a book if they needed to learn something or ask somebody how to do something. And this is because Like Linda mentioned earlier, my mother was a migrant to this country, and so her schooling was really interrupted by the war, and so with my dad for similar reasons. So they both were driven by, I guess, feeling a lack in their youth, that they didn't get some opportunities to do some further education. So that made young Esther figure out that if in her household people are picking up books and asking how to do things, this is the normal way that adults work, right? There was no thought that you can't ask a question about that, or, you know, you can't have an inquiring mind. And this really set me up really to be self-sufficient in my own learning journey later on. So throughout life, we're faced with many, many obstacles to continued personal development. So we start off in our careers and we feel that we have to make a big impact early on in our careers, so we can't take time off to do more study. Then we find a partner and we settle down and we want to have a family. And then we say, well, now if I do personal development, I'm taking time away from my children and my partner, and that it's not a good time to do it. So what I would try to encourage everybody is that make personal development part of your life, like breathing and walking. As straightforward as that. If you can do that, you will reap such benefits. So if on every Tuesday you read an article on a Tuesday morning when you get into work, that's what you do, and it takes half an hour. You spent half an hour on personal development. And if you can spend half an hour on a Tuesday, you might be able to spend half an hour on a Thursday. Then you've spent an hour on personal development without changing your life too hard. This might be done over coffee breaks. It might be done during your lunch hour. But whatever it is, put yourself first and foremost for personal development, because the benefits to society and you as a person are just phenomenal. So if we think about the benefits to society, the economic benefits, let's talk about the money question, because that's what everybody's interested in, right? So if we continue our education, we have economic benefits, pretty obvious ones. We start to get paid more money. If we start to get paid more money, we have more disposable income. If we have more disposable income, we're supporting our local communities, we're supporting our state, we're supporting our country. We're propping up the economy by our choice for personal development. Just think about that for a second. That's how powerful this choice is. You know, and it doesn't only extend to the economic benefit. There are many non-economic benefits. People who continue study end up with better health outcomes. They're more integrated into their communities. There's lower criminality into communities where there's more people doing continued education. And it doesn't have to be formal education either. Studies have shown that you get many of these benefits through vocational education, through working with societies like ASCI and working with within your peer groups. It can be something as innocent as learning how to make pottery. But whatever it is you're keeping your brain malleable. And if you keep your brain malleable, you're staving off some of the things that happen to us in old age. So it's been proven that the brain is elastic enough to continue improving throughout your life, so that if you do take up study later in your life, you will stave off the ravages of dementia. You will have greater independence for longer in your life. And if you have people who are integrated into the community that are older, we have that whole idea of that village again, raising people to be better human beings. Women particularly benefit from continued education. So it's found that women have this great ability to be able to learn from all the roles they take on in their life. It's called multi-role theory. So if women are parents and they learn something from raising their children, if they are involved in a family business or in a community organisation, they take those lessons and they're able to apply them in the boardroom. They're able to become better executives from doing this. It doesn't have to be formal education. All it requires is you having a desire to understand something you don't already. So that's sort of my tip to you. And so when you asked me how was I able to do masters during COVID, if my mum was able to come to another country, learn a new language. One time I came home from school and she was learning how to tile from a tiler. If she can do all that, then I can certainly undertake some study during COVID. So that's what I have to say. And I reflect very much on what Linda and Rebecca and Alex have said. The other key to this is having networks and understanding that sometimes the path isn't clear, but if you follow your interest and if you follow what drives you and what your passion is, however you find that path, it will become your path. You'll be the one that clears the brush for the next people to follow you. And that's what we all need to strive to do.
Yeah, fantastic. Esther, thank you so much for joining this panel. I don't know why you thought you were nervous to do that, but you did a great job. And you know, I think before we get on to Rebecca, I can see you nodding there about the continued learning. We do have a question, so I'll come back to the question, because what are your comments on continued learning as well, to Esther's point?
Look, I think the continued learning piece, I'm amazed by you doing a master's in COVID, Esther. I really am. I was very excited to have completed an adaptive leadership course during that, which took me 3 weeks. But look, I think supply chain managers need to be adaptive. We've got, you know, particularly supply chain managers, from my experience in the FMCG sector or managing complex supply chains, we need to be able to pivot and adapt quickly to issues and changing timelines. And so I found this course amazing. It was run by Andrea Clark, who is the author of a book called Future Fit. It's called Adaptive Leadership, and what it does is aims to develop frontline leaders going forward into the future. There were a high percentage of women that were on that course as well, and it really taught me a lot about how historically we talked a lot about IQ, and then we moved into emotional intelligence, into the EQ being the sort of leveler. And now we're moving into AQ. So it's about adaptive leadership. It's about being able to pivot and to change and to challenge. And, you know, back to the choose to challenge theme, I think it's so important here. We've got a changing environment we witnessed in 2020. We need to be able to back ourselves and to question and to challenge. So yeah, that would be my answer to that, Monique. I think yeah, continued learning, absolutely, Esther, is the way we need to progress. And as you said, and as Linda and myself said earlier, about channeling yourself into the passions that you love, and you'll find, you know, that'll be your way.
Yeah. Klaus Zillner has put a message into the Q&A box saying, to the panelists, what would you say were the biggest hurdles you faced when entering supply chain management, be it in logistics, operations, procurement? What would you say? Linda, you've shared a few. You made redundant, for example, and those sorts of things. Linda, what would you say to the biggest hurdles?
Wow, great question. I think even identifying where supply chain roles are is tricky. That we talked about the breadth of supply chain, and Rebecca mentioned FMCG as a particular supply chain, but the multiple components in supply chain, I think, is really tricky to understand. I was talking to somebody recently who asked me how to get into supply chain. And I guess I took two approaches. One was to say which companies have a flow of goods that you're passionate about. So to look at companies from a flow of goods perspective and look at jobs in their supply chain. And then the other way to approach it is look at companies who are supply chain companies. So distributors, third-party logistics providers, freight providers, and approach it from a supply chain segment perspective. When it comes to barriers, I think Alex touched on the fact that there aren't really standards or levels in supply chain. So trying to understand what level you're at in a company that you're targeting is really tricky. So I think I've talked about a couple of the barriers. Possibly my hindsight would suggest that actually networking with a broad range of recruiters and looking at your own network, the use of LinkedIn or your colleagues' contacts, you can take a fairly direct approach to finding jobs in that way. And possibly one additional way of finding out, finding how to get into supply chain is to take project opportunities, look for project opportunities in whichever company you're in, and look at those transferable skills that lend themselves to supply chain. So I mentioned, for example, relationship management, process and analytical skills are highly coveted in supply chain. And so perhaps it's more about positioning yourself with some relevant transferable skills, albeit it might be a small segment of the supply chain that you've been exposed to, but at least you can say, I have worked in a project that looked to implement systems, or from an audit perspective, look at controls or risks. So things that are allied to supply chain, but very transferable.
Excellent advice, Linda. Thank you for that really great response. Any other panelists interested in tackling that question?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I think this is really also for me going back 25 years. It just seemed all too complex, and I was worried that I would not be good enough. And I think this perhaps is not only true for women. There might be men out there as well, but I felt I was the only woman there in the department, logistics department. And then there was a discussion about who is looking after which supplier, and I put up my hands. I want to be in charge. I was based out in Europe, in Austria at that time. I want to look after Asian suppliers, and then Bangladesh, we had a manufacturing there. No way. I was immediately pushed back. That's not an area for you. So I got further intimidated. But I was so dedicated that I want to go there. And coming back on this educational part, because of feeling not valued enough or not having enough confidence, I did then my executive MBA in international supply chain management, where I was, I think, we were out of 25, 3 women. And that was in 2006-07. And in 2007, I became the regional supply chain head of my then company. It's about really being pushed back, but you need to get up and you need to drive your own confidence. And I think back to the topic of Esther, Rebecca, and Linda, we're talking here, is this continued education as well. And I have another approach here as well. Sometimes we always expect, as I challenge myself, I'm not expecting that my company is pushing me for continued education. It's my own responsibility. There is this, and I expect my company to support. That's it. And I think you have seen a lot of, perhaps in the last months, I like the statements very much where a CEO is being asked by the CFO, oh, why do we spend so much in this continued education for these guys? What happens if they leave? And this great CEO replied, what happens if they stay on? The continued education nowadays with logistic industry 4.0 is so important. And I really want to urge women as well, because with COVID and we had really some drawbacks, and it's understandable, but the facts speak for themselves. There is a gap of 20% wage gap all over between men and women. And I'm talking here not about being paid equally for same work. I assume that's all good here in Australia, but that means there are different job levels allocated to much more male employees, and that will have a drawback on in our retirement. It will go further. We will have less. 20% in average less in our superannuation, and that's why I choose to challenge myself. But I really want all the women to think over it, and we need all the men as well to support our way of thinking, because we want to live together peacefully but equally. And it's really this one. That's really the challenge I had, to overcome my own internal obstacles, but also overcome the perception others had of me and my capacity.
Yeah,
so
excellent.
That's about me.
Thank you. And there's a message here from Sandra. Sandra Mortzes-Florian, who's also just successfully been registered under ASCI. Congratulations, Sandra. She's asking about your thought about choosing a new role. Would you rather go for a salary or for the non-salary related opportunities? and why? So I think, Linda, you alluded to going for the areas that, getting projects and going for the areas that are going to be hot into the future, which is an excellent response to that question. Any other comments on going for new roles? Should go for salary or non-salary related opportunities?
I'm happy to have a first crack at answering. Sandra, I think it's incredibly personal given the time of life that you're at. I've made choices for both reasons during my career. So sometimes I think, shall we say, going sideways to get more experience, or taking a REM cut because there is an opportunity that really would broaden out your long term. I call that playing the long game, versus maybe a shorter game of I could have more remuneration, but it might not move me forward in the long game. And in doing both, I've actually been reasonably conscious about it. The only thing I would say is that at times, if you're making a move simply for REM, you may alter your long game. And at times that REM focus can put you in a role that you ultimately end up not really liking or enjoying. So that can have quite a lifestyle impact on you. But I think you make the choices based on your own life at that time.
Thank you, Linda. Great response. Anyone else been in that quandary before? What you'd prefer to do, Rebecca?
Look, I second everything Linda said there. I'm a mother, and my kids are still, they're not grown up yet. They're still reasonably small. So my decisions currently, may be different than they were when I was fresh out of university and into my first procurement role. I too have made some choices over the years where, I dabbled in mining for 5 years in mining chemicals, and it was a great opportunity and I learned a lot, but I couldn't wait to get back into FMCG. So, I think you will forge your own journey, Sandra, and you will soon very quickly realise what it is that makes you tick, makes you feel comfortable, and where you want to challenge, and where perhaps in your life, that there are other priorities that come before that.
Esther, you were going to comment as well.
Yeah, I've got two comments actually. So for our first question about what some of the barriers are, I think we create some of our own barriers. So I think my learned colleagues here have all shared some of their history and how their paths have merged and diverged and how they've got to where they are. But the thing that was common to all of them was that they had a bias to action. They didn't wait for the opportunity to come to them. And so I think that is really important. So yes, there may be an apparent constraint, but what I learned from my mum was sometimes you can go around it, sometimes you go through it. But either way, you don't have to accept it. And so that was one of the things I'd say to you. And that may simply be something along the lines of our own internal thoughts about, well, what is the supply chain? I can tell you it's not just logistics, right? So have a think about a bit broader about what supply chain is and what are the alternate paths in, because sometimes it is that is the exciting part. And that leads into my second answer to, should you make a choice about remuneration or opportunity? Personally, I always value opportunity. I think that the money comes. Do you know what I mean? I think that, and that's a personal statement, I recognise that, but I think that if you've got opportunity, then you can always do something about the money. If you have no opportunity, the money's the money, and that's all you're dealing with. So that's a personal choice for me, and I understand that will be different. And I very much bow to Linda and Rebecca's prowess in this area, that it is very much a personal decision. But I think, I guess in my career and my friends' careers and the people we're talking with today, all of these people have shown they've got agility and flexibility, right? And so you need to come with this. This is something you need to adopt for yourselves, is this flexibility and agility. Sometimes it doesn't mean the dollars. Sometimes it means the opportunity and the way to go further. Sometimes it means finding an alternate route to, you don't always just go A to B. You might go through Z before you get back to B. But having the wherewithal to do that, I guess, is where I'd like to leave it. So.
Yeah, thanks, Esther. Great response. And I hope, Sandra, that's answered your question. Talking about Z, I have read Taylor Ayling's question here in the Q&A box, and I've actually just chatted with her, asking her, would she mind if I brought her across to the panel side? I hope you didn't mind. Thank you, Taylor, for being such a sport. So Taylor's asked a question about Gen Z, of which she represents. And I think this is a really important question, as the rest of the panel are leaders in supply chain management and have teams of people, and will be looking to newcomers to their supply chain teams from this generation. I think it's important for us to consider Taylor's questions. Yeah, do you want to ask your question, Taylor, live to the panel, please?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thanks for calling me up. Not a problem at all. I just wanted to say that I feel like, from my perspective as a master's student studying supply chain, most of us have the perspective that we don't realize the opportunities that supply chain management holds, and almost understand the merit and importance of it in a long-term career. How would you, this relates obviously specifically to Linda in the beginning, but all of you throughout everything you've said, how would you sell the supply chain management career to a Gen Z like student, or just all of us in general? And what would you advise our logical first step or movement would be?
Linda, would you like to start with that, since Taylor thought of the question from your story?
Sure. So Taylor, I think I'll answer the second part first, which was some of the comments I made earlier about how to get into supply chain. So looking at areas that interest you, companies that interest you, and how strong your network is. And then looking at functional disciplines that can go across the supply chain. So I think there's lots of ways in. How would I sell the supply chain? For me, it's all about breadth, and with that, variety. So never a dull day. But for me, it was the incredible breadth of being in a goods company or a goods business rather than a services business. So goods have to travel all over the world. And I think COVID's shown everybody just how global our supply chains are. So as a future career, it isn't going away, and it's becoming more and more integrated, more and more attached to technology. So the breadth of career once you are in supply chain, I would say, is literally endless. I saw an extraordinary piece. I'm quite fascinated by blockchain, and I know Azra is on the call, and he and I have talked about ag tech. But when I started to explore ag tech, I found that there is now new technology that is able to examine by drone and infrared sensor the ripeness of fruit, so that pickers can be directed to certain areas of a farm to reduce wasted effort, if you like, increase productivity, and that the yield by picker and by area of the farm can be brought back in to calculate the number of hours manufacturing, the yield, and the number of trucks that are needed to then carry the goods. So literally any area you're interested in that has any form of goods, supply chains front and center. So I guess I'm a bit passionate about it, aren't I? Yeah, so variety for me.
Yeah, that's right. Rebecca, what would you say to Taylor?
Taylor, I think it's a great question. I think I love procurement in particular because it is different every day. There is something new and exciting to focus on, and I love to be able to lead, but I also love to get my hands dirty. So it's that sort of a role where I can go to all extremes. I guess the biggest thing I would say about procurement is a great leader once told me that procurement is the conscience of a business. And I've taken that with me throughout my career, and I make sure that I am the conscience of the business, so that we are sourcing ethically, that our Modern Slavery Act is complete, that I am comfortable that I can put my hand on my heart and go to the MD and say, I'm doing everything I can to protect this business, and I'm entrenched in it. And I think that's important to me, to feel like I'm making a difference and I'm adding value.
You're passionate too, Rebecca.
I am a bit, yeah.
I think everyone in supply chain is passionate. I don't know if you get it, Taylor. It's from everyone in our community. Alex, what would you say to Taylor?
I would say to the first question, I would say break it down. I think it's overwhelming. Supply chain management is so many big areas. You have to plan, source, make, deliver part, and it could be, you have so many stakeholders. It's a huge ecosystem, and you feel the huge responsibility because it's very much cost related. It can make a company fail. My personal advice is, it needs, what has been already said, it should be an industry, a company you feel, or goods you feel dedicated or you can commit to, and choose one of the segments to go in, and then you see how you develop and go into the next steps. Because a real good supply chain manager, in my view, has has the knowledge, experience in depth in one area's procurement, sourcing, or planning, or delivery part, and then you go across. And then you will feel how you act. For me personally, it was always about being international or having a huge communication round. I just loved it. But you hear us, we are the passionate people. But for me, it was also important to relate the industry I am in. So, and it's a gut feeling. I think it's very much where you need to feel it here, but helping you to focus which of the four parts will you feel more comfortable. Start it step by step, by piecemeal. It can be very rewarding if you are looking for not a boring, an exciting job, or there are people who just like to have a standardized jobs day in, day out, but there is never a dull moment or day in supply chain for the last 28 years I'm in, and that's for me, and that's what my recommendation is. Start small and develop your skills.
And Esther, what would you say Generation Z will offer some of the organisations at this point in time? It's a crucial action decade. What do you think Taylor's generation will give?
I think Taylor's generation will bring us hope for the future, actually. I think that all of the things that Gen Z are looking for is where we want to move. And I think the critical mass brought by new people into the industry will get us over the line and push us over the line. So when you work for a little while, you find that there is natural resistance to change. And this isn't a bad thing. It's human nature, right? If people are in their life and they're comfortable, they don't want to change. They don't understand the need for it. But to survive as a business, you must. Change is inevitable. We all change through our lives, and there are natural points in which people and generations come into organisations and they change those organisations and they change those industries. And I think Gen Z is poised to do exactly that, with their care about corporate social responsibility, and their care about the environment, and their care about equity and equality amongst all peoples and all economies. I think this is something we all should embrace. And, for me, I'm excited for the future, and I'm excited with what it brings, and we just need to get on board and support and encourage these people into our organisations so they can make the difference. And I'm a big proponent of reverse mentoring, and if you haven't been involved in that, I highly recommend it because you learn so much. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
So Taylor, just tell us a little bit about yourself. So you're from WA, you were saying. You'll just have to unmute yourself and just tell us your plan.
So I'm studying at Curtin University in Perth. I did my undergrad at UWA and then moved to Curtin to do my master's in supply chain management. I'm graduating at the end of this year. So we'll see then where I decide to go. I've just done an internship at Roy Hill in supply chain. So it was my first experience into the real world of supply chain. So it was interesting to see how broad supply chain is in terms of like what you can actually do in supply chain and how different it is in each role. I think studying, I just thought, okay, I'm going to be in supply chain management, but didn't realize the perspective of it. So yeah, exciting stuff to see where it is going to go.
And on your International Women's Day, how have you chosen to challenge yourself or the things around you from the panel discussion today?
I think, well, obviously now that I'm graduating, I'm looking into graduate roles and positions and applying for everything, because now obviously that's my time. But I think I was quite scared of supply chain, and especially exactly what Alex said in terms of how scary supply chain did seem to me, even though I was confident in what I was studying and I'm enjoying it. But the industry just seemed quite scary to me, but I have just, I don't know, it's calmed me by just being part of this alone. But I think a lot of my thoughts that I didn't think, I thought was just me. I realized that even though I'm Gen Z and you guys have been through all this a few years ago or whenever, it's okay to feel like that even now. And I just have to take each step as it comes and then hope it all's right.
Thank you so much for joining. And I'll go through each of the panelists. We've got 4 minutes to go. Just a quick snapshot of what you would like to end on, please. Starting with you, Linda. What's your last takeaway from today's panel discussion?
Great question. I think the access that we have to each other via ASCI and organisations like NAWO to demystify and make the barriers seem smaller. So to Taylor and Alex's point, we all feel like that. It's about, what's that lovely expression, feel the fear and do it anyway. And you know, the relativity of a comment from Esther around, if my mum could go through, you know, if you see other people who have accomplished, what do you think they did? Sat back and went, oh, this will be easy. No, we all feel it. So I think that's the big takeaway. If you feel it, then having the ability to access a network and talk through your fears, where they come from, are they well-founded? What could you do to mitigate the fear? So for me, the big takeaway is having forums like this and ASCI and NAWO to reach out to.
Yeah, great. Alex, your thoughts from today's discussion?
Yeah, I feel also the same. It's so great to have this network, and it's so important, especially where we can exchange ideas or reach out for inputs and benchmarks. And I hope, Taylor, you have really found some interesting parts in it. I just want to make a short reference to the International Women's Days, because it's, I think, the 110th time that we're celebrating it. And at the very beginning, when we were speaking about setting up the panel, I felt like angry. I did this 30 years ago already. I'm engaged in this gender gap and stories. And I feel, oh, when will be the day that we can abolish that we don't have to discuss it anymore? But I still see a need to discuss it more, to create awareness, to have our allies, men allies on there. And just on a short note, I'm dreaming. My dream is, I want to follow the story of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Normally was dominated by male, 100 musicians with maximum 2 women. They had a lawsuit in the 70s. After that, they had blind auditions, and by 2000, they had a participation rate of 48% of women.
Yeah, that's a great result.
You know, it's really a blind audition. Do we need this? But this is my aim. Then I will stop.
Rebecca,
thank you for asking.
Yeah, we're just on the hour, but Rebecca, what would be your last takeaway?
Well done, Taylor, and all the others on the call. I think you've made a great choice in looking into going to supply chain, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. I just would call out to ASCI again on the amount of continued education, the sheer volume that they have on offer with podcasts, with events, webinars, you name it. So I strongly, guarantee that you will be rewarded if you go on to ASCI, follow their portal, and really try and make the most of the opportunity and the modules that are available to you.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. And Esther, your last words.
I guess my last words are, look at the resources you have around you. This is just one example of them. There's many. Reach out, use them, because if they're just sitting there not being used, then they're being wasted. And so these women are enormous resources in this industry. I'm sure they won't mind if you reach out and talk to them and get some insight, further insight. So thanks for letting me be part of this. It's been great.
Great. Thank you so much, all the panelists, Linda, Alex, Rebecca, Esther, and thanks for joining us, Taylor. My last takeaway is this is going to be a recorded webinar in our YouTube channel. I'd like each of you to share it with at least one other woman who missed out on today's session so that they too can be part of this discussion and feel like supply chain is the career for them. Thank you very much, everyone, and bye for now.
Thanks, Monique.